I feel like it's the artist's job, my job, to weed through all that experience and, kind of like interpret my version of it.
Hello everyone, Richard Smythman here. Today it's my great pleasure to bring you a conversation I had with artist Bob Doucette. Bob is a multifaceted artist and spent many years working in the animation industry as a designer, storyboard artist, and then director. He's worked on many classic shows, including Animaniacs and Tiny Toon Adventures. In 2013, Bob left animation to become a full-time gallery artist and currently exhibits extensively across the United States. I've known Bob for almost 25 years. I've had the pleasure of working with him and calling him a friend. So, without further ado, I bring you Bob Doucette. I wanted to start this with you're going to CalArts. And then, obviously that was your transition into animation, and then we can talk about the backstory as well. But what year did you go to CalArts?
It was 1987 that I went to CalArts.
And was it the party place at that time as well? Yeah.
Well, it's very weird because I went there for grad school. So I knew that I was paying for this and I wanted to suck all the life out of it, but not just the partying, the studying part was more important to me. I did a 4-year program in 3 years. I had to apply for that and I had to, work really hard and get a lot of projects done to accomplish that. But, I was 25 and I was around all these 18-year-old people. I was like, what is wrong with them? You forget at that age, the mentality is just to get laid and to get drunk, and that's all that they cared about. We had the famous pool at CalArts that was known for nude bathing. Well, I'm from the East Coast, so you don't nude bathe anywhere, right? And it was just a part of it that was so freaky for me and so strange that I was able to just go, okay, I'm going to put that aside and I am going to focus on work. And I do actually tend to get more excited about what am I going to learn?
So when making that decision to go there, was it all about animation for you, or was it just that you saw a variety of potential subjects that you could focus in on?
When I went to CalArts, I was at a turning point where I was deciding between going into theater design, set design, background drops, stuff, or animation. Animation was a childhood love of mine, but I had been doing theater for a while with a friend of mine who I met at summer camp. And he's 20 years older than me, but I was able to, through him, I flew out to LA and designed these operas where I designed the sets and the costumes for them. And that was a big whole new world for me. And I was real excited about that. So I knew I wanted to move to California. I tried New York, didn't like it. So I knew I wanted to move to California after coming out. So that was my main impetus for going to CalArts was to move to California. I had great animation instructors at Rhode Island School of Design, and they recommended that I go to CalArts. So I when I got to CalArts, I went into not the character animation department. I went into, and they've changed that name a million times, but it was called motion graphics at that moment. But it was really the more independent filmmaker route. And I had an incredible mentor named Jules Angle who had done really incredible, in the 50s when people pulled away from Disney, he had gone through the Disney program. He was he worked on Fantasia, the old school Disney. And then he pulled away and he was one of the founders of one of the most famous mid-century animation studios that did Mr. Magoo and all those things. It was great because at that point in the history of animation, no one wanted to do anything away from Disney, So this was someone saying, no, we live in this time of modern art and design, and so they went the opposite direction and started doing like this very stylized stuff. They're famous for Gerald McBoing Boing and all of the really kind of cool, what you think of as 50s design, basically. So anyways, he was a great inspiration, and he was also a painter and worked in galleries. So he was a good mentor in that he was trying to help me prepare to be a designer of anything and not be stuck in, any one place. And then at the same time, I went to the character animation department and worked with my other mentor, was Bob Winquist, who ran character animation at the time. And I was there with so many top people who went on to run Pixar are the people that I went to school with. Ashley Brannon, who directed Toy Story 2, wrote music for my student film. I had Pete Docter was in my class. You name it, anyone you can imagine. A bunch of people that I knew at Warner Brothers too, Keck Singleton was in school when I was there, Jenny LaRue, Paul Fisher, all these people. Paul Fisher, who ended up directing the one about the mouse that gets flushed down the toilet. I can't remember what that was called, but anyways.
Flushed Away?
Yes, Flushed Away.
Yeah.
I think he was the storyboard director for that. But it was a really good time. I was surrounded by amazing artists and learned a lot from that. But I know you don't think this is crazy, but I also worked in the theater while I was there as well. And I've always had a love for theater and doing, sets and costumes and puppets. So that was available to me as well. So I got to do a little bit of all of that while I was at school.
Well, you grew up doing puppets, right? Making puppets and...
I was a puppeteer and a puppet maker, and I've done it. Okay, so I have a tendency to work this way. I know most people do one hobby and then they're done with it. I did this for 10 years. I spread out little bits, throughout my career, so that when I'm talking to people and they think I'm only an animation director, they're like, "You did what?" And then when I'm talking to painters and they're like, "You were an animator?" I get that a lot, but to me, it all makes sense. It's all, my little loves, and puppetry was a big one. When I was a kid, I had my own company with a friend of mine called Messy Piece Theater Company, and we would perform at the Blueberry Festival and the Children's Corner at the library. We were on the radio so we were a regular fixture in Maine. And then in Rhode Island, after I graduated from Rhode Island School of Design, I worked at the Puppet Workshop of Rhode Island for 2 years. I was their main performer, but I also designed the sets and new puppets for shows. And I got to write. This was another person that I worked with that was amazing, who really helped me in my story development. We would do these great sessions where we would write scripts together. So, I've always been in a situation, I think, because I'm so curious, that people want to feed me information. I think that if you want to shut someone down, you just act like you know everything. If you stay curious, people are dying to give you information. So anyway, so that puppet thing, and then the last to tip the puppet thing off, I also, over the years in theater, have done puppet bits. But in LA, my last job before I started animation was working at Bob Baker Marionettes. And I designed a line of Warner Brothers characters that were in the old days when they had the Warner Brothers stores. That was in the catalog of the Warner Brothers marionettes, basically, that I designed. So I've done a little bit of that all through my life.
Were you designing those when you were at CalArts, or was this after that?
No, after I graduated from CalArts, I had the first year out of school, I had more jobs than I've ever had in my life. And I worked at the Ice Capades. I worked at Landmark Entertainment, and I worked at this at Bob Baker's Marionettes. It's incredible because I look at that year out of school and I'm like, I've never done so many things. I mean, there's so many odd jobs that I did. But yeah, like I got the Simpsons thing. I'm sorry, the Ice Capade thing because of my puppetry background, and we worked on making Simpsons walk-arounds for the Ice Capades. But I also worked on, you're gonna love this, the Mario Brothers. Making the costumes of the Mario Brothers. And then yeah, I had a little taste of everything. I even worked on a Paula Abdul video. I did cell painting.
Very therapeutic, cell painting.
Yeah, it's very hypnotic, like getting the pool of cell paint to just lay in the right place and then to push it around. Yeah, I loved that. Was a good job, actually.
Yeah, it's fun. So you're doing all these. So this is kind of your first year out of CalArts, right? You're doing these 3 different jobs. At what point then were you looking? Were you looking during that time? Were you looking at Warner Brothers or at a foot in the door for an animation proper, or were you quite content to just keep doing what you were doing?
I know this is going to sound crazy, but I didn't want to go into animation. I had a lot of success with like my films in independent film festivals. So I thought that life of like being the artsy fartsy filmmaker who does it on their own, and does film festivals, which makes absolutely no money. But the year before I came to CalArts, I had gotten into a film festival in France, and I got to go there. I mean, it paid for my trip there. I got to, they took care of my hotel and my food while I was there. So it was a great experience. And I was like all heady about, because you get to see the international animation and then you see it as an art form. I think when you get into, because you started in Europe, people have a different opinion of animation. They don't see it as like one set thing. They see it as like an art form, basically.
London was like, when I started in the mid 80s, like London was full of studios that were just doing everything across the board stylistically. And they were all kind of like subtly competing with each other and pushing the bar. And it was incredibly experimental. Like one of the first jobs I worked on was doing in-betweens on a show for Paul McCartney, actually, which was in the style of Dormier. Right. And,
wow.
And then you go to another studio and you'd be like rendering on frosted cell. And there, like everyone was kind of pushing the bar and trying to explore and experiment. And it felt at least very much like, there was Disney in the States and then there was everything else.
Right.
Right. It kind of felt like, it at least felt like that from my perspective at the time. But I'm really glad for it, that I got a chance to see that it was a bigger art form than just what was being done in the commercial houses in the big studios in LA and that,
Yeah, I think I would have fit in better. You know what I mean? Like, I think
Sure.
that would have been a natural place for me. I'll tell you the most shocking thing. So I had friends at CalArts who kept pushing me to get into studios. So I had a portfolio, but it was unfocused. Like I didn't understand when I got into animation. I did not understand that the union forced you into positions, and you were either one thing or another, and that I found offensive. Like what? I can only be one thing, and so I got in as a background painter because that's the only thing that I really had a focus of in my portfolio because I had studied illustration before. So I met this director, Eddie Fitzgerald, who was and is like a crazy director to work for because he does not like to fit within a box. Like he would bring in a postage stamp and say, could you copy the colors from this postage stamp? And be like, okay. And I had no problem with that. Everyone else was like from Disney, and they were very uptight about like, this is the way we paint backgrounds. So when I got on Tiny Toons, I started as a background painter, and I didn't like the idea that I was painting someone else's drawings at first. Like that was like so weird to me, and also like that I had nothing to do with characters. That bothered me because I like drawing, characters. So I taught myself, actually now it's an invaluable lesson because like I learned about backgrounds and atmosphere that like I use constantly in my painting skills, like it's just helpful, gave me an approach to what I'm doing now. But, soon after getting there, and I used to have people all the time saying, "Oh, you are ambitious." And it wasn't, I was curious, like they said it like it was a dirty word, ambitious.
God forbid.
So I started looking around at like what else I could do. And the thing that really kind of catapulted me towards I went was after Tiny Toons went down on hiatus in those days, Warner Brothers was so rich that they would keep us all there between seasons, which was unheard of before that. The golden age of TV animation. So I get to work on the development of Animaniacs. And I was like in direct contact with Tom Ruger, who was working on, designing Animaniacs. So I was in the ground floor and I was coordinating characters and background styling. And I was just like, had my hand in everything. And Tom came to me and he said, "You know what? You should be a director." And I was like, I cannot do that right now because these artists are all assholes. If I have worked for them, they're going to be like, what is your experience? I mean, seriously, in those days, you had some really strong, opinionated people who like, you probably know this. They're very competitive about how well you draw and stuff. So I was like, please just give me a chance to learn more. So I did everything from storyboard to character design, background layout, character layout. I just tried a little bit of all of that stuff, and that's kind of how I built myself up towards directing.
But did you have mentors then in the studios that were showing you like how to storyboard, or you'd already picked up a good bit of that stuff from CalArts? Or
I did I've done storyboarding, for a long time because just since I've been making films, student films back to my undergraduate as well. So I had that, but I also had all these friends who were storyboard artists. So, I could glean from what they were doing, what to do. On top of which, as a background painter, we used to break down the storyboard. And we would, and this was like a great thing that they just don't even think about unless it's a feature nowadays. But actually on TV, we would go through and say, this is, like you need to key this scene off of this key background. And then if you didn't have one, you would paint the storyboard panel. So we would prepare, and I knew the storyboards really well from that as well. And then as far as character design goes, I worked with Lynn Naylor, who's one of the best in the industry, from Ren and Stimpy and onward. She's just an amazing designer, and she really gave me a lot of great tips on that. And then when I finally started doing it, I started working with other people. Now, the one that I really suck at cleanup. It's the hardest thing for me because I can't stop changing my mind. You know what I mean? I love that, you make a little doodle of a character and it's like, I want it to be that because it has all the life that you want in it. And then you spend all this time and every time you clean it up, it changes it. So to me, that was a hard thing to settle on,
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was having this conversation just the other day about, if you just even go look back at the golden age or one of the golden ages of Disney animation when everything was Xeroxed and you could see the animators' roughs under the drawings and that. And then we went through this stage of kind of over-perfecting. And I think that we lost a lot in the process. And it would be lovely to see an animation style come back where they go back to that kind of more kind of fluid look, hand-drawn look,
I think it is what you said, though, just to agree with you on that. I think it's the xerography that did that because they suddenly found that their line had to be final, whereas in the old days, the ink and paint people would clean up those lines.
Yeah, well, it is weird, isn't it? Because we go from the inking that kind of started in the beginning, which had that more clean, polished look. Then you go through that, like, what would it be, 60s to 70s kind of more loose Xerox look. And then everything started to tie down and get super tight, like, I guess, like late 80s. And then especially when they transferred to digital ink and paint. Because I remember when I was at Bluth, it was the first film that we worked on there where digital ink and paint came in, and they were talking about you can't have any open lines. Everything has to be closed off because obviously they need to fill. And I think even little things like that kind of shift the mentality of how rigid things get, in some way.
Well, you think of that time that you were talking about too, like, I'm thinking, when I think of xerography, I always think of like 101 Dalmatians and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And how we still had these brilliant old animators. And so when they were cleaning it up, they didn't have to, they didn't have to worry about closing off the lines and all that stuff. It still had this vitality of a drawing done by an artist, whereas the ink and paint people were craftspeople who were cleaning it up. It seems like we missed that great in-between stage where it was this vital drawing stage. And then it became another like craftsperson doing the cleaning up. And the second era of Disney films, a lot of really crappy cleanup. I mean, I hate to say this because most people will just shoot darts at me, but because young people like Beauty and the Beast. But I look at it and there's a lot of horrible cleanup in that.
So you get this opportunity, or you get offered an opportunity to direct, but you didn't take it right away. You started storyboarding and kind of earning your dues, so to speak. So you started off on the Tiny Toons Adventures and then went to Animaniacs. Is that right?
Yeah, Tiny Toons. Then we did the Tiny Toons made for video movie. How I spent my summer vacation. Then we finished because I started at the end of the first season of Tiny Toons. We did that video. We did the second season, and then I went on to development on Animaniacs.
Right.
And this was the most creative time in the studio. It was unbelievable. Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski were developing Batman at the time. We were doing Animaniacs. I mean, it was like, and then there was a bunch of development that never took off. That was probably better than stuff that made it on the air. I mean, incredible artists there at the time. And so the Animaniacs, I did because people now knew me as a background painter. I would freelance backgrounds, even though I was now working as a character designer. And character design, character layout, were the two main ones that I was doing during the day, but then I would do painting at home at night. I like keeping my hand in it though. It was fun that way. So yeah, my big claim to fame was that when we were developing Animaniacs, I designed the logo for the show. I love Tom's, the way his brain works. He just looks at me and goes, go draw a logo for me. And I'm like, okay. And so like, I just thought, well, Tiny Toons was using the rings and then updating them, like the famous Warner rings and having the characters run out of them. I was thinking, well, this show takes place at the studio. So I thought this would be great to have the Warner Brothers hanging out of the logo, the WB logo. And so I just did a drawing of that and gave it to Tom, and he was like, I love it. And he said, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to get a character designer to clean it up. And I was like, no, go ahead. I was designing it. I wasn't like doing the final line on it. So anyways, later on, I hear people in conversations saying, I designed this. And then the painter who did the background was like, I designed that. I was like, no, none of you. I was there at the beginning. So I know who designed it.
That's probably one of the wonderful things also of working in TV, even over feature, which is that you got a chance to do so many different things. If you go into a feature studio, it's very easy to just get put into a department and sit there for a very long time. But Warner Brothers, it seems like that was kind of like a golden age of that studio, and the opportunities are just fantastic, you know?
Yeah, I was lucky. I mean, I was so lucky. I really did walk into a great time. So I'll tell you another little story that really kind of catapulted me in other people's eyes. Because at first, it's hard to get street cred when you're in animation. So I was working, I think I was still a background painter, and I shared a desk with this person who was a storyboard artist. And they were storyboarding one of the first, this is before Animaniacs had even come out, but they were storyboarding this sequence. And in the script, it said, okay, we had these characters called the Good Feathers, who were pigeons that were like the good fellas. And so like a riff on Scorsese kind of filmmaking. And it called for handheld camera, follow pigeons down into subway, just to make it feel like, like a handheld camera kind of sequence. And this storyboard artist just like threw her arms up and said, I have no clue what that means. So she handed it to me and said, will you draw this sequence for me? And I was like, I'm not afraid of anything. So it's like, okay, fine. But while you're doing it, you have to think in terms of how are the backgrounds going to be animated? Because every frame. And so I was trying to like not ask too much of the animators, you know what I mean? Like be reasonable with it. And so I storyboarded out this whole sequence very meticulously of them walking down the stairs, the subway coming in, and then the doors opening. That's all I had to show, but it had to have like that weird camera kind of move. I do that. So now by the time that show went into layout, I had already moved on and was working on character layout. So my director comes to me and he goes, I got this really hard sequence and I need someone to do the layout, and I don't know if anyone else could do this. And he hands me my storyboard back, and I now do the character layout for that scene of like showing exact. So I designed how you follow, how the camera moves and stuff. So fast forward a couple months, we get our first footage back, and they invite Steven Spielberg to come to the studio. And we're all sitting in anticipation of Steven coming in. And we're in the conference room, and I'm sitting on the floor, and everyone's around the table. And he goes, hey, I just wanted to say, I just saw the first footage from Animaniacs. And he said, I'm so impressed by it, especially this scene from Good Feathers. Unbelievable. And he's like, who storyboarded the section where they go down into the subway? And I'm like turning like beet red. And my director goes, oh, Bob did that. He was like, great job. And he goes, and who did the layouts for that scene? And then my director's like, oh, Bob did that too. And he was like, great job. He did not congratulate anyone else personally except for me. So that meeting ended and everyone was looking at me like, uh-oh. So that kind of like, like gave me a lot of street cred at that moment. So
well,
cool.
You're set right up for a promotion after that, right? That's a pay raise right there.
Yeah, ka-ching, ka-ching.
So how much longer were you at Warner Brothers before you moved on?
Well, so I made it through all of Animaniacs, 2 seasons of that. And then after the second season, we went into development again. And I had done a bunch of different things, but I was basically in a development crew. And because at that point, feature had come in and they wanted to do features at Warner's. And the TV people desperately wanted to be a part of that, but they just were not going to let us in on that. So I worked on a bunch of different things. And then finally, Tom Ruegger just said, look, you're good at this. I want you to head up a development. I've got these artists who are available to you. And so he came in and he said, these are things I want to work on. And one of them was a superhero show with dogs. And the other one was this thing called Big Fat Baby, which like no one understood what he wanted to do with this Big Fat Baby. It was like a silly gag thing with the Big Fat Baby. So we developed all these things. I assigned all the different artists, And then Jeff Gordon came up with this design that I think was brilliant because it encapsulated exactly what Tom wanted. And he called it Road Rovers. And it was basically these dogs that become superheroes and have different vehicles that are like all different dog shapes. So Tom loved it. And so we turned that into a more finalized pitch and pitched it to the network. And when they bought it, Tom made me the creative producer on the show. So, which was lovely. And then Jeff was a associate producer on the show and had a lot to do with the design of all the vehicles in that show. But so we did like a year of that show. It was a really fun show. I loved, one thing I loved about being the creative producer was now I was at a level where I could do everything. You know what I mean? Like people all came to me and I could give, like I could just get a taste of all this stuff. I had say in character design, I had say in the background design and the color, all that stuff. And I was in on a lot of meetings. And Tom was very generous with me, like he really treated me like a real creative partner, which was fantastic. So that didn't get picked up. So then we worked on another show and we, this massive undertaking called Hysteria, which I think you might know that one, which was supposed to be like an Animaniacs take style show, taking on the subject of history. And it was huge. It was the most overwhelming thing I've ever done in my life. And we pitched it to Bob Daly, the president of Warner Brothers, who bought it on the spot. And I was suddenly responsible for a $40 million budget. I went from like a tiny 13 episode show to a 65 episode, $40 million budget. So it was unbelievable. And I ended up having a crew of like 60 artists underneath me, which was unreal. I loved working with the artists, like that's probably was one of my favorite things is all the different kinds of artists that you get to work with, everything from voice artists to background artists, all that stuff. And I hired Steven Silver on that show. Yeah. And he's like this 25-year-old kid who had more enthusiasm. Like that kid was there on time, ready to draw at any moment. And he was a great, like, like some people just do the job. Other people are actually good partners, people that are good to work with. So, and your wife was my assistant because she was I hate to say it, but she was my favorite and I had to have her. And she was also 25 at the time as well. So I had her as my assistant and then Stephen as my art assistant. And we got to all know each other really well. And I really enjoyed it, except for it was so overwhelming that, and we started getting behind schedule at some point. And the problem is like the suits in the situation are always coming at me. They won't talk to Tom Ruger and tell him what's going on. They come to me. What are you going to do about this? And what are you going to do about this? And what are you going to do? And I would always say, look, I will do what I can do. And as the producer, I took on directing. And I ended up directing more episodes than my directors. And I had 4 directors. Because I first of all, the approval process much faster when it's directly from me. But I was like, if you need something from Tom, then you need to ask Tom. I can only, ask and prod so much. It's your job to get that out of him. So anyways, I ended up having like a little bit of a collapse at one point where, cause like I used to come into work like an hour early because I had a desk that was piled with things that I physically had to do, but I had no time to do it because as soon as artists started showing up, they were at my door all day long. How do I do this? What is this? What do you want me to do for this? What, I want you to look at this. Will you approve this? So I had a little bit of and I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I had a little bit of a nervous breakdown where I couldn't stop crying for 3 days, and I just had to go home. I mean, I physically was drained, and I just went home. And then when I stopped crying, I said, "Okay, I guess I can come back to work now." So,
But like, it's a
that
hell
was
of a
the thing.
responsibility to take on 60 odd episodes of a show. Like the fact that they would even book 60, what was it, 63 episodes?
It was originally supposed to be 65, and at the 3/4 of the way into the second season, the network decided to cut it down to like 55 or something like that. And that was a day where we walk in to the conference room, and I'm watching Tom Ruger explaining this to my crew, and that he breaks into tears. And then we had this fabulous guy who I love so much. He was a timing director. You might have known him. His name's Tom McLaughlin. He's not around anymore, but he was this big, he looked like a football player, this big brute guy, but he was a sweetheart. He got up and put his arm around Tom, and it was like, "It's okay, Tom. We're going to get through this. It's okay." And so we had to like basically tell them, your jobs are not going to be secure. And so that was a complete freak out. And you know how it goes. At that point, they weren't keeping people forever and ever. After your show was over, you were let go. That's what I'm just saying. That's what pushed me to the next move that I made, though.
So was Hysteria the last show that you did at Warner Brothers?
No, because they came to me and said, "You have to pitch your own show." And they had been in the middle of development for 6 months with writers and artists, and it was a week away from the suits from Warner Brothers coming in to pitch. And I went home with my friend Michael, Steven Silver, and Bobby Page, who was our producer. And we came up with an idea for a show. And I drew all the characters, and then Steven cleaned them all up and colored them, hand colored them on like standees. Is the old school day. I painted some background pictures, and we went in and pitched the show, and it was the only show that got picked up. All the stuff that had been developed for 6 months was trashed. And so our show got picked up, and I was thinking about saving my employees, like I had 60 people who were going to be out of work. So then we had to call it down because this is a much smaller show, and we were able to save 30 people, which was fantastic.
So what was the name of that show?
That was called Detention. The funny part about this is I could have told anyone that you did anything about a school, it would have been popular, because the networks are not looking for originality. They're looking for, what's popular. And the show, what is it called? Recess was really popular at the time. So I thought, well, school is obvious, it's the milieu that was in at the moment. So I just chose to do this in a junior high school. So
you were at Warner Brothers about what, 8 years, 9 years?
12 years.
12 years in total. So when did you leave Warner's?
After Detention, I worked on the Zeta Project as a director, the first season of the Zeta Project. And then the second season, they let me go. And I was supposed to be a full-time storyboard artist at home because, now they got, like, they could save money by not bringing you in kind of thing. And then there was some ruckus went on, and I don't know what it was, but they dumped me at that point. So I was out of work for like a year. And then I came back in because they were doing Baby Looney Tunes. So me and Mark Howard were the storyboard directors for that show. And that was fun. We had a good crew. But after having done these big giant shows, it was kind of good to just like come in, do my job, focus on that. But I think Looney Tunes Baby Looney Tunes was my last show, because that was around 2002. And then I was off for a couple weeks, I think it was. And then I got hired at Mike Young Yeah, in 2002.
Well, it was also around that time that the whole industry was kind of transitioning in from traditional animation into CG. Like I know that when at DreamWorks at the time, around 2002, 2003, Sinbad was kind of like the last hand-drawn film that they were making, and they were looking at the new technology, and it was, the writing was on the wall. Now it's going to be CG moving forward, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite so much in TV, but by the time you went to Mike Young, things were shifting in that direction as well, right?
Oh, yeah. In 2000, there was also a big shakeup in the industry where people were suddenly being, I don't know if there was like an economic downturn, but people, you know what I mean? Like where that happens and then everyone starts like tightening their drawstrings and stuff, and not as nice. I just, like it was kind of a rougher time. So when I went to Mike Young, like I probably would not have gone to a independent studio, that was not a union studio, if it hadn't been for that situation. You know what I mean? It kind of like pushed me into it. And it appealed to me because I was brought in as the character designer, actually, to design, because our friend, our Kira Anderson, was working there, and she recommended me because she knew I was out of work at the time. And I went in to work on Scholastic's sequel to Clifford the Big Red Dog, called Clifford's Puppy Days. And I went in and just designed all the characters. And so they were bringing in the head of Scholastic from New York, and she was a formidable woman, basically. And like, I don't even have a job at this point. I'm a freelance person, but I'm working with her, and they're bringing other people in from New York, and we're all working together and all this stuff. And so like, I'm a workman type person. Like the first series, they didn't do turnarounds, no profiles, because they said it's impossible to draw this character in profile. And I said, well, that's bullshit. You can draw any character in profile if you know how to draw. And so I was like, I'm like, this is how I would. And so I just thought, I'm just going to show them. And you know how you do like all the cute little posy stuff. So Emily Elizabeth with their puppy in her hands, I did a bunch of poses and put in several where she was in profile. And this woman like sat up in her chair and looked at my drawing and said, you've drawn her in profile. And I was like, oh, here it comes. And then she was like, that's really cute. We should put that on the model sheet. And so like, she liked working with me. Like there was no, and I just turned to her because she was like saying, Bob, you need to do this. You need to do this. You need to do this. And I looked at her and I said, are you hiring me or not? Because I don't have a job at the moment and I would like to know. And I just like asked her point blank, are you hiring me as the director? Because I need to know. And so like, sure. But I've never had the, like, this is going to crush me if I don't get this job. It's like, this is an opportunity that I think I'm right for. So I'm telling you right now, like I'm available if you want to hire me. I've never, I think that's actually the strongest thing I could ever tell someone is if you don't want a job, they will never end. Because at Mike Young, I was quitting for the whole 11 years I was there.
Well,
they would bring me projects and I'd be like, I don't want to do this project. And they'd always threaten to fire me. I'd be like, okay, great.
Next year you're still there. Yeah. So, well, with Mike Young, it was interesting because a transition came in also into the style of shows that you were working on, right? Like there was more of the kind of toy-based productions going on that were essentially marketing tools.
Yes. And like you were saying before, also, it was my first opportunity to work on CGI. And I really was excited about that because growing up, I loved all of those puppet animations and stuff. And I thought CGI had the potential to be really adorable. Now, early CGI was ugly as sin, so trying to figure it out. How do I make this work? oh, if we make them look like toys, the CGI will be more
Well, look
kind,
at Toy Story,
you
right?
know?
95, that came out. And
Yes.
I think Toy Story was a real eye-opener for me when I first saw those designs. I remember thinking even back then, like how smart it was to pick that subject matter, because humans just looked, even like cartoony, broad humans, everything looked terrible, but hard
And
surfaced objects really read well.
it'll work.
And that was really smart. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. So I had that opportunity. In fact, Warner Brothers called me and asked me to come back, and I was like, "Is it a CGI show?" And they were like, "No." And I was like, I have to stay here because like I was given this opportunity. So I did that show. I don't know if you remember. I did one called Dive Ollie Dive, which was little toy submarines. And and so mainly because I knew that they were all kind of vehicles. There was some fishy characters as well that we'd had a better chance. And also, they didn't have to walk on the ground. They were, because that's a very difficult thing in CGI in those days. So we were going through water and basically boats and stuff. So I thought this has potential, to be really like a great design challenge. Like, I think I can work this out so I don't, I can make an interesting show out of it. But you look at them now, and it's like 10 years later, they all look so crude and old fashioned, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, the technology's just, it really has come so far. And yet, it's funny, you'll find the odd film that really holds up well. As I recall during this time, though, you were really also actively working on your own stuff as well. You weren't just doing animation, right? Like I remember we would come over to your home, and I was always half intimidated and impressed at like how much work was around the place, and the puppets, and your office, and the all the work that you were doing. Were you consciously were you thinking even at that early point that there needs to be an end game here, or there needs to be a bigger picture?
Yeah, like ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be like a painter, a full-time painter. And, like, I never think about, being an artist as being a money thing. It's just like, I knew that that's who I was. And I started painting when I was like 8 years old. And I took to it. Like, it was like the only thing I was good at. So I really took to painting and really enjoyed that. So over the years, like if you don't work at it, it's not going to develop into anything. And I didn't see like a possibility, like how can I fit in the world? And then in the 1990s, I was walking in Pasadena, and there's this gallery I'd never seen before. And I walk in, and it's the first time I've ever seen this. I think it was his first show of Mark Ryden, who of course became like the most famous California artist of the day, doing this kind of what they call pop surrealism, where they were taking, pop culture and cartoony backgrounds and all this stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can see myself in that world. Now I feel like there is a way of getting into that world, because so my partner and I were, to go back to the puppets, when I met my partner, who is a costume designer, I decided it would be great to get back into puppets, but to try and make them more sellable, we decided to do art dolls. And since he could make the costumes, I could do the sculpting. So through the 90s, I was selling my art dolls in galleries. And I still wanted to paint, and I just wasn't having as much time. So around 2008, I said, this is it. I'm planning my exit strategy. And I started working full-time at home on my portfolio, because like, I'm like, if I ever am going to make this leap, I have to do it now. It was like, I wanted to be out of there by the time I was 50. I didn't, I thought anything after that would be too late to really.
So you're working full-time at Mike Young, working on productions, directing, and then you're going home and basically doing the same again on your own work. That's an incredible work ethic, because I think one of the traps that you can get into, especially working in such a time-intensive industry like animation, is by the time you're done drawing all day for work, the last thing you want to do is go home and be creative?
I would get up in the morning early because I live close to work. I would get up early. I would paint before I went to work. I would come home at lunchtime and paint. And then after work, I would come home and paint. And then on the weekends, I would paint. So like I was determined to get out of animation. The thing about animation is, so Warner Brothers was a great time. I was young and I was learning, and that's always a great thing. I feel like I'm proud of like what I did as a person, like facilitating a lot of people's careers. I have so many, when I left Los Angeles, the people who came up to me saying that I gave them their first job was staggering. And that I'm very proud of. But like, it's not the pride that you get from creating from scratch your own thing. And as an artist, I just felt like that's where I wanted to end my career, on something that was self-motivated, basically.
So ultimately, you've got two things going on here. You're leaving animation, but you're also getting out of LA. When you were thinking, okay, I'm going to leave LA now, like what was kind of like the thought process on where are we going?
Well, so I had a couple things that I had to work out. One was I knew that I had to establish my career selling in galleries, because California's got great galleries and there's a lot of great stuff there, and people who collect art. So I know that when you go to a small town, you can't just become a small town artist because it's not the same pool of people there. So I think it was, so 2013 is when I finally left animation for good. And we were still there for maybe, I think, 5 years. And then by the end of that, my husband was so sick of his job and was ready to leave, that he gave me full reign. Go look, find us a place to live. So, like all I needed was a nice place to live with an artist community, so that I had some support that way. And we love historical homes, so that was another goal for us.
Are there any parts of LA that you miss as far as living there?
Not really.
No.
I fully took advantage of it while I was there, but I feel like I'm not like so missing that, because I live close enough to Chicago, and Chicago is like a whole brand new city for me. And even though it's small, it's a great, fun city, and it's got a great museum there. So like if I want that kind of culture, I can go there. Plus, I have something here that we didn't have in LA, which is that you're so much closer to people because you don't have to drive 5 hours to get to their house. You know what I mean? Like, it's more convenient to be around people. And I also find that LA is a real job workman town, where people's mentality is always like, the first day of your new job, people come up to you and go, "Where are you working next? Can you give me a phone number? And who are you gonna?" They were constantly jobbing you, wherever you go. Here, it's like, I always say, this is the funniest part, is like, someone said before I left LA, "You're going to be a big fish in a small town." And I laughed thinking that's ridiculous, but it's true, because in LA, no one cares about you, unless what you're doing right this moment. Yeah. What'd you do? Yeah. So what if you made a big movie? What'd you do this year? And here I have, just incredible street cred to, like, have had a career at all. I could stop today and they would still think I was a big deal. So that's a nice feeling as well. It's opened up a lot of opportunities for me as well.
But do you also have the infrastructure of having that gallery system that you set up beforehand? So you have that outreach that you developed when you were in LA. Do you think that would have been as easy to do if you had not been in LA, if you had been where you are now, trying to develop the same thing?
I know people do it, but I think it is hard to do that. I think that it is, like the interpersonal part, and actually the gallery system has kind of dissolved from what it used to be. They used to be much more powerful. But I do think there's so much to benefit from it. So I still go back to LA every year and do shows there, and I have collectors there that I built up over the years. And for me, like, half of my work is about connecting with other people. I want my work to connect with other people, but I also love meeting people who collect my work. And usually you'll find that they become devoted fans when they know you personally. That is actually such a huge thing. So, like, if you're just like on the internet all day long, you're missing one of the most important things about life, is like directly interacting with people, and what you get out of that. Plus, I got here to find that there actually art collectors. There are art collectors here, maybe less. But there's also a gallery that I just did a one-man show here recently. So it's like, but I'm glad that I had done all my homework and had that stuff going. Because at this point, I'll tell you, I have regular things where I do shows. One of the big bread and butter I'm deciding is my group shows, because it's a great where you only have to do like one or two pieces for these shows. But I have a gallery in Scotland. I have one in Portugal that I do. I have there's the Cactus Gallery in LA. There's Lewis Galleries in LA. And then there's the one in Scotland is like I regularly do stuff with them. So I'm constantly and then I have a new one that's in San Francisco and a new one in Florida. So I think that it's really important that you just got to get out there and meet people,
Before today, I was just kind of looking over your stuff, and I was trying to kind of pinpoint what kind of genre that your work is in.
Pop surrealist.
Pop surrealist.
Yeah, some people hate that name because it was kind of a made up name. Kenny Scarf, who's a famous graphic designer who became a bigwig in painting and background, he was a really amazing painter. He coined the phrase pop surrealism, and I think in a way it's a great way of saying what the group of people who actually don't look the same but have similarities, in that we're relating to pop culture in a very surrealistic kind of way. And I think that, to me, I always explain it this way, is like we have the internet to thank for being connected to every period in history and every person who is online. So I feel like it's the artist's job, my job, to weed through all that experience and, kind of like interpret my version of it. So I'm inspired by everything, old and new. And I think art history has always been a big background for me that I have a lot of love for. And but I look at the newest thing to the oldest thing and try and it's just my way of looking at the world. And I think that my puppetry, my doll making, my theater work, my animation, my character design has all built towards my taste and what I do with my paintings.
I think you've got a very unique style. You can see the influence of animation. You can see the influence of some of the things you've talked about today. And yet there's more there. It's more layered than that. Who were some of your big influences, like when you were growing up? Like who really wowed you or made you think that's a style that I'd like to explore?
Well, I think when I was a kid, like the world was my oyster, like everything and anything. This is crazy because it sounds nothing like what I'm interested in now, but because I was from Maine, I loved Andrew Wyeth. And that was like, to me, the pinnacle of a New England, style that was amazing. But I was also, there was a PBS series when I was growing up about Leonardo da Vinci. And I was like, he was my idol. I was in love with Leonardo da Vinci. But the two biggest influences in my life have always, or three, I should say, because I was going to say Warner Brothers and Disney cartoons, but also Jim Henson and the Muppets. Um, and of all my idols, he's the one that I get to meet, which was lovely. Chuck Jones, one of my other heroes, actually picked my film in a contest, and I was told directly that Chuck Jones fought for you in this because he loved the color in your film. So that was my connection with him, which was lovely. Unfortunately, Walt Disney's been dead too long.
You're living the dream now. You're in Peoria. You're painting full time for yourself. What does the day look like when you, as far as how dividing your time between work and non-work related stuff? How do you go about managing your time and making sure that you meet deadlines when you don't have someone to meet a deadline for?
Yeah, well, I do have a calendar that's ridiculous because like I've been doing this so long now that those calendars fill up really quickly. And I keep that calendar updated all the time with, like this show, because like I'm also shipping my artwork to long distances often. So I do have to like work towards those deadlines. I also, this is all that years of working in a business like animation prepared me for the way I think as well. Yeah, like I'm thinking, okay, I need photography because before I can varnish my paintings, I need to get them scanned professionally. Luckily, fantastic company called Technocraft is right down the street from me. It was like God put it in front of me. It's unbelievable. And so I get my painting scan. I know that takes 2 weeks. So like I've got everything like lined up. And then the other part of that is I have a really workman ethic about my time schedule, which I'm very particular about. I don't think because I'm working at home that I'm, allowed to act like a retired person. I actually have to do work. So I get up early and I kind of like go and do all my business stuff first thing of the day. Cause like I have to go through emails, like today, it was so funny when you texted or when you emailed me yesterday, I thought it was this morning because you were like, I'll see you tomorrow. And I was like, oh my God, tomorrow? I'm busy tomorrow. So anyways, but I do that in the morning to make sure I didn't miss anything. Like you have an interview today. And then I kind of get that going. And then I go up to my studio. So I start early. I love the morning hours for painting. And then in the afternoon, I'm more likely to do the stuff like, like you always have to do stuff online, I color correct all of my photographs from the being scanned. But I color correct them and then I have to put them out, like got to put them out on social media, got to put them, send them to the gallery. Here's your high res copy for your online presence, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of business to business. And some of that is mind-numbingly boring. Shipping things, always not fun. So there's just a lot of that stuff. Like I have to frame my own work sometimes and getting that together. And then the one thing I really love about being here though is that I have artist groups that I've never had before that are incredibly helpful. For one thing, I have this group called Art House that we created this year. And basically on my street, we live in the most historical street, of the whole town. This street is like where there are consistently beautiful old houses, no telephone wires. It's just like walking through a movie set, really beautiful old houses. And it draws artists to this neighborhood. And first of all, my friend Rick moved here from LA. We knew each other from being in shows together. And I kept saying he wanted to leave LA. And I kept saying, just come and look. And he was like, finally made it here and was blown away and ended up buying a house the week that he came here. And also, he has a job that he does online. He's an art director for Xbox, and so he can do that at home. But then also, he now lives in this great neighborhood amongst other artists. We have my friend Alex, who moved here from Colorado, is an incredible printmaker. He does things for Fender, and he's done like all kinds of amazing things. So we got together and created this art house group. And the idea was based on the model of, we live in a historic town where they do holiday home tours, which are usually at Christmas time. You can go to like 5 or 6 houses, tour the home, and they charge money for this. And I was thinking, well, what would be more interesting? How about if you had a studio home tour? So we live in historical homes. You can tour the home, but also you can meet an artist working in a studio, buy some art. And so April, we decided to make it far, as far away from the holiday home tours as we could, so that we didn't step on their feet, and did it in April. It was a resounding success. We all made good money on selling our art. We did special prints and things, which helped with that as well. But like, just meeting your neighbors and meeting people who are interested in art often leads to selling art. So, I'm like, I'd much rather be alone in my, how it goes, where you want to just be in your studio doing your thing. But when I force myself to get out and work with other people, you can create incredible things like this, like where it's a little bit of the best of all worlds, because I'm working with my friends. We're not paying a gallery, any commission. I think it's something only an artist, would think of. It's a creative way of solving that problem. So that's become like an annual event, and we're going to do children's scholarships as well. So we're real excited about the future of that.
Fantastic. I did want to just hop back to one thing. I don't know if you recall, you actually taught me Photoshop.
I did?
When we were at Mike Young, where one afternoon I went into your office and you showed me the basics, and I'd already opened it, but you were essentially my first introduction to how we could end up using that in a pipeline. And you mentioned just there that you use you color correct on the computer, so yeah. I'm guessing you're using Photoshop for that.
Yep.
How much of your process, like when you're going through your ideation process and then obviously painting on canvas, what's the balance between digital and traditional media?
Well, and I don't know if you remember this, but like, I was really into Photoshop for a while, and I had I remember when I was working at Mike Young at the beginning, there was a lot of time where there was nothing happening, and I hate sitting idle. So I would just sit and work on Photoshop. I ended up like pouring all my effort into doing caricatures on Photoshop. It was a great way of like boosting my skills on Photoshop. I mean, like at the end of the year, I had like 100 caricatures, and I was able to like make a book of them because I had working at that. And and I also used it while I was there to design characters. And so I got into that habit, like digital was a thing. So when I first started thinking about my career as a gallery artist, I thought about digital, and I spent hours painting, because I had a Cintiq ever since the beginning, of Cintiqs. And I painted a bunch of paintings and started printing them and hating the way they looked. I just did not like the translation from, like, I loved what I saw on the screen, but I couldn't capture that, at a final stage. So in 2008, when I started physically painting, I took all those paintings that I had done digitally and used them as the reference point for my actual canvas paintings. And then what I was able to do is I've made that part of my habit, where I will basically design my initial rough stage of a painting on Photoshop, because you can collage together things. You can like reuse the head from this painting I did before, and then put that with this, and like I love that there's like infinite possibility of moving things around and making sure your composition is working, and that you've thought a little bit about the color before you commit to anything. So I regularly use Photoshop. Um, just like, it's a great design tool, first of all, because you're not wasting canvas or paper, getting that stuff out there. Or how sometimes you do a drawing and you're like, that would be perfect if it was this. So you scan it and then you correct it, and it's like you're so much further along than like, I'm going to trace it and cut it apart and all the physical stuff that we used to do. By having that Photoshop assist is amazing.
Do you think, though, because I think that one of the issues, maybe this what you were coming across, is everything that's on our screen is backlit, and so
Yes.
the idea of how colors work and they react to each other and all of that is all kind of changes slightly from traditional media. But for young artists growing up, this is kind of a running theme in some of these discussions, because there's a lot of young artists that will be watching, that are looking for kind of a path. And I'm really big on trying to promote the idea of working as much with traditional media as possible, because these tools, Photoshop, it's a fantastic tool. It saves time, and in a production environment, it's an incredibly useful tool. I also think, though, the lack of commitment, the ability to constantly undo, can also be a trip hazard in its own right. What do you think?
Well, if you're a procrastinator, it is a great way of procrastinating, because there are infinite possibilities. Well, I'll tell you, when I started, I think when you are looking at things in the abstract, there's a lot of fear involved. Like, I don't know how this is going to come out. I have to think about this, But like, once you're painting every day for 10 years in a row, you don't think that way anymore. I don't rely as heavily on the computer now at all. Like, recently I did a very large painting that was like 5 feet by 4 feet. So I wanted to know where everything was for that. But one of the things I learned from painting is, if you're at all trepidatious about the colors you're going to use, the way to get around that is don't. And I always start, and I want to make sure that I have a black and white painting that I figured out all of the values first. It's like a good drawing. For me, I do it with paint, but I want to establish all of the rendering in, and I tend to use brown and white, but off-white and burnt umber. And I work it all out kind of in the traditional fashion of, then I will glaze the colors over that. And I find it's a little more consistent, and you have less problems. But at the same time, I think you got to let the material talk to you. Like, you start painting, I don't know, but I think like there's like this natural thing that happens where suddenly you think of, oh, I got to use this color for no reason. Like, I remember one time I was painting flesh, and I pulled out, maybe raw sienna. And then I was mixing that with like this magenta color, and then a little bit of white. And it's like, oh, like incredible flesh tone that I wouldn't, it seemed outrageous at the time, this, yellow and purple. Wow. Why would you do that? And, but then you mix it. So I find like, when I go into color and stuff, it's much more, not planned, but much more, what do you call that? Intuitive, like where I'm like looking for clues, like, oh, I think that could be this, because then that would balance with that, And it's from years. When you're young, you need to like study the color chart, and you need to find out like what works the old fashioned way. I've had years of that. I've had years of figure drawing, which I will tell you, I highly recommend to anybody, because when I look at young painters who don't have figure drawing, I can see it right away that they rely too heavily on the photo reference because they don't understand three-dimensionality. And
Yeah. No,
yeah, you know what I'm saying. That's a
the
big issue.
three-dimensionality thing has been a running theme through a few of these conversations. The idea that developing artists become shape aware much quicker before they become volume aware. And it's almost like you wish you could reverse that, like become volume aware, then become shape aware, and then things would develop in a much more solid way. But yeah, it's an ongoing thing, getting people to, and also getting people to not just blindly copy what they see in front of them, to have an analytical approach, to understand why something is a three-dimensional form sitting on a two-dimensional surface. And how do we translate that idea,
Don't you think like a lot of those rules that you learned in animation became huge in how you approach things? Because one of the things that we always talked about with design was, first of all, appeal, which I think a lot of people do not understand, that just because you made it look exactly like the photograph, it's not necessarily appealing. It's not, you've done nothing to make it attractive to look at. The other one is tangents. My gosh, if I didn't learn about tangents from Lynn Naylor, was the one who gave me the big lesson on that. That is like another way of making something feel dimensional. And I remember Steven Silver, when he first started working for me, he was great at design, but he had never physically broken it down into the elements. And we had done this character design, and Tom Ruger sent it back and he said, it's too flat, you got to fix it. And so Steven sat down while I said, do this, this, and this. And he looked at it and he was like, what did you just do? And I said, well, you have to understand that because you made it designy, you have tangents in here which are going to flatten it out. Tom prefers a three-dimensional look. And yeah, there's cartoons that go on the flat side. It's acceptable, but like if you want a dimensional world, you have to know these tricks about not flattening out where you lay things on in your picture. Very important.
Well, I think even with highly graphic styles done well, there's that sense of volume and mass incorporated into them, so you get the best of both worlds. But yeah, I agree, like the training for animation and the training for figurative art, especially the type of figurative art like I do, for example, is the crossover is completely there. Well, that system is just really designed for animation, really, that approach. And yeah, it's obviously it's all about thinking volumetrically and thinking about mass turning in space, not just a series of shapes or a series of lines on the page.
I'll tell you another thing that is good for all 2D artists. And that is, if you really want to learn about how to make volumetric drawings, try and sculpt your drawings. Because once you've had to three-dimensionally interpret that thing and realize as you turn it, it's a different thing. That line doesn't stay still. Like that, I think was probably because I've done sculpture so long, that also aided in my way of seeing things in a three-dimensional way.
100%. I've done very little sculpture, but I do remember the one time I tried to sculpt Bugs Bunny's head. And it's like, you suddenly realize that the model sheet is a bit of an optical illusion. Same with Goofy. Like from the Goofy looks great on the model sheet, but if you actually sculpt it literally, he's looking straight at you, like he's all nose. Like you can't even...
Yeah, his nose would be right in front of his eyes.
Yeah. Remember also on Simpsons, people were saying that Lisa, her hair was impossible to sculpt because it looked great from profile, looked great from three-quarter view, but it didn't turn well. And then even like in animation, if we had to do slow head turns for her hair design started kind of presenting its issues as far from a design point of view.
I heard that the revelation for the Simpsons characters for toys was when they started doing 3D computer-generated characters, because that way they were able to solve those problems, which are very hard. Like, something that's relatively flat, you know? Like you look at the old, for me, I grew up with the Peanuts characters, Charlie Brown and all those characters. Their front view and their side views are not correct. I mean, they do not, they morph the face as it turns. So when you look at toys of them, like sometimes they'll look great from one angle and then they don't look like what the character actually looks like. But yeah, that's so that's why I say, like, you give yourself that problem, you will learn a whole lot about how to draw a more three-dimensional rounded object.
Well, even what you were talking about earlier, there's still TV shows you'll see that they will only hit a three-quarter front view. Like, you know, or you may get a profile. There are some characters that just look bizarre straight on.
My reasoning for why I think it's very important that you have a profile always in your that works, because I think it flattens out the worldview when you're watching a cartoon and you're not seeing a person in the full three dimensions. If you think of great comic books, how, you know, like there'll be the profile of two people talking to each other, the long shot, you know, like all those things tell that story. And I think with animation, you know, like two people looking at each other in profile is a valuable tool for giving another dimension to those characters. If they're always three-quarter, you know, like, hi, how are you? You know, and then we never see like straight on or and straight on is not the most appealing, but like you have to see it once in a while, a straight on and a profile shot to get a full dimension of the character.
Absolutely. You have just recently completed a huge mural. I saw on the side of a building. There's a picture of it, obviously, on your website and social media, and I'd encourage people to go check it out. It's a really beautiful piece of work. How did that transpire? What was the backstory there?
I think part of it is always like wishing and projecting what you want. You know, like so I've painted large before because I did set design. Never that large. That was a 3-story building. And so what happened was that the first year that I moved here, these people I know have this fair called the Big Picture Street Fair. And in the Big Picture Street Fair, one of the elements of it was mural painting. And they had asked me if I wanted to paint a mural. And I just like immediately said no, like, why would I do that? You know, because I was thinking, I can't do that. I've never done that before. And then they did this thing. They said, well, can we use your painting? I'd done a painting of the Beatles that was like the 4 of them in a long format in a row. And they took that and made it into a paint by number and blew it up to like 30 feet. And they got the whole community to paint on it. And I think one of the reasons I couldn't do the mural that year was because I was actually had another engagement half of the day. And when I came in, I saw little children, people in wheelchairs, old people, all walks of life painting on this thing. And then halfway through, they turned it around because they didn't want to reveal that it was the Beatles. And so halfway through, they turned it around. It's like it's all stretched on this building. And then people get real excited when they know they're working on this piece that looks like something. And so by the end of the fair, it hadn't been finished. And I said to the guy, look, Tom and I, if you give us the paint, Tom and I will come and finish it next weekend. And he said, no, that's not how it's done in Peoria. We're going to have a paint party. And so he put it out on Facebook. Anyone who wants to help Bob Doucette finish his painting, meet on this day. And we get there and 30 people showed up. 30 people. And they were the best group. And like, you know, some of them maybe came for 10 minutes, some for an hour, some for 30 minutes. So we finished the rest of the mural. And now it like hangs in this mural park. So I was really proud of that because what I loved was the interactive quality. I got to know a lot of my people who are still friends with mine. And one of the couples that I worked with on that was Maggie and Mark. And Maggie runs a design firm that basically, I'm trying to explain how they do this. You know, like they work out for like your public image for, you know, for industries and stuff. So, and that company's called Semantle. And Maggie finally retired from there, and they asked her what, you know, what she wanted for a present, because usually they would do like 2 weeks in Sonoma, or, you know, 2 weeks in wine country, or something like that. And she asked if she could use the back of the building to, if they would pay for a mural to be done for the back of the building. And then when it came, and they said yes, and when the time came, she chose me as the artist to do it, which was wonderful. And because I kept saying, I regret not having done a real mural, you know, where it's painted on the wall. And so that was like a 5-year process. Last year we got the design all figured out, but time ran out because you know, like winter comes, you're not going to be painting outdoors. So time ran out as we needed to have the bricks repaired and also paint a base coat before I started. So this year it came up, and it was, I have to tell you, I didn't expect this. It was the happiest I have ever been doing this thing, because I would get up at the crack of dawn just before the sun came up and drive down there before anyone else was there and get on that lift and lift myself up and start painting this thing. And I was beaming most of the time. I was so happy. But the side effect of this was, I thought I was doing something totally selfish just for myself. But what happened was the reaction from the community was unbelievable. I had people coming up to me all day long, you know, waving and giving me thumbs up and just like talking about this. And everywhere I'd go, I have people come and say, thank you for beautifying our neighborhood. And that was like so moving and so incredible. And then we did a big dedication, and the news media came out and filmed, and we presented the whole thing. And then when, you know, like Maggie started talking about what it meant to her, that was like overwhelming for me. It was so beautiful, this whole process. So anyways, that the lesson for me on that was like, sometimes you have to do things that feel a little selfish, you know, because you never realize the impact it's going to have.
Absolutely. We will have links to your website and your social media down below. But is there anything that you want to promote? Is there anything that you want to get the word out about right now?
No, I think if people just check me out on social media, Instagram is my most up-to-date kind of stuff, where I put stuff about shows. My website has everything on it as far as like where I sell my work. It's got it's got a show calendar on there of upcoming shows and stuff like that. And also they can contact me. My email is on the web pages also. You know, you never know when someone wants a commission, got to be available for that.
Absolutely. Bob, thank you so much for doing this. It's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure, but really, I can't thank you enough. And I've learned things. Even as long as I've known you, there was stuff there today that I didn't know. So really appreciate your time.
Well, very cool. Well, thank you. And always a pleasure to spend time with you. And my love to all the Spider-Mans.
Thank you.